Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to test your sit down. I'm going to test your mental coordination with a little sit down with a little number called swinging the alphabet.
Swing it, brother. Swing it.
Right.
Right up.
I'll explain it so even you can understand. My colleagues will assist. Ready, sister? Let's get that junk out of here. Come on, boys. Scram. I'll give you the idea in a nutshell. B-A-Bay, B-E-B, B-I, Bicky-Bye, B-O, Bo. I'll give you the correct demonstration. Cutie pie, pound those horse teeth.
B-A-Bay, B-E-B, B-I, Bicky-Bye, B-O, Bo, Bicky-Bye, Bo, B-U, Boo, Bicky-Bye, Bo, Boo.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Pop. This is Vintage Pop episode 7. So we are one away from 2 months in. Today technically would have been episode 8, but we actually took 1 week off. I guess you could call it a spring break, as this is now the Tuesday after Easter Sunday. I'm your host, Greg May, and welcome to Vintage Pop. If this is your first time visiting our show, Vintage Pop is a podcast hosted by me. The show is dedicated to bringing you the stuff you missed from yesterday from someone who was not there for it the first time around. And it's a fun and informative look into the pop culture of yesterday. Movies, books, music, and TV will be talked about from all eras. And today in particular, we'll be talking about old comedy shorts. So it kind of technically will go with film or the movies, you could say. But this in particular will be dealing with the Three Stooges shorts. So I feel like the Three Stooges has always been very popular for people. And this might not be the first time that you have ever heard about the Three Stooges, but by the strange chance that you have never heard of the Three Stooges, well, we'll tell you a little bit about the Three Stooges, a little background information as we go on throughout the show. Also, so I wanted to call it Essential Stooge Shorts, so that's what we're going to do. And what I mean by that is that we're going to talk about 3 shorts that you definitely need to check out. They're also, as I was taking my notes and reviewing some, I also put down some what you would call honorable mentions. Stuff that you should check out, but if you only have time for the 3 that we talk about on the show, then that's perfectly fine as well. So, we'll get off to some contact information. The best way to contact the show would be through email. If you have any comments, concerns, recommendations, please, you can email us at vintagepop@gmail.com. Again, that's vintagepop@gmail.com. We have the blog page, which is actually the best way to see all the notes and stuff that we do for the show, and that is available at vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. We have a Twitter. It's just at vintagepop on Twitter, so at vintagepop on Twitter. If you are using iTunes, you'd like to use something else, we're available on Stitcher. We're available on Podbean. Also, I like to talk about all the time, we have an Amazon search bar on the blog page, which could really help financially with the show. I don't know how much you get, probably not much at all. But what you do is you just put our blog page in the bookmarks bar, vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. On the right-hand corner, you'll see some neat little vintage things that Amazon auto-generates for you to check out. But if you want to get your shopping out of the way, you can just add our blog page to your bookmarks bar, and then when you access that, you can type in any item you'd like in the Amazon search bar, and then that will take you to your purchase. And every time you use our search bar, I think we get a couple cents. So that would be very helpful. So we got that out of the way. Again, that blog page is vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. So the Secret Cinema event that I was plugging, how we always talk about those towards the end of the show, some upcoming events and whatnot. The previous one was actually canceled. Let me bring that up. I don't believe that they have any definitive rescheduling for the event right now. But just going over that again, it was going to be at the Woodmere Art Museum. That was back on Tuesday, March 20th. This is how long it's been since we've actually done a show. It's been a full week. If I wouldn't have gotten to it today, it would have been a full 2 weeks. But I like to record them on Mondays. I had class last night, wasn't feeling well. A lot of outside information, it doesn't matter. But there was those two double features, Youth Runs Wild, followed by Madam Spy. Both of those were canceled. There is going to be an upcoming Secret Cinema event slated on the website Friday, April 20th, which will be at the Fleischer Art Memorial. They haven't talked about what that event will entail yet, but apparently this event will be done at a later time when they do a new series, apparently. You can check out all that stuff. As I always do, I'll leave the website for the Secret Cinema in the show notes so that you can visit it later. The main thing that we'll be using to assist with the show tonight, actually, is a book that I told you about in previous episodes of the show. It's called The Great Movie Shorts, Those Wonderful One- and Two-Reelers of the 30s and 40s by Leonard Maltin. It's a book that came out in the 70s, including more than 200 nostalgic photos from comedy shorts. Did not realize how great of a reference this would be for the show, as it has a full section on the Stooges, as well as the order in which the shorts came out. So that is also very helpful to the show in our case for tonight, so that I can actually be a little bit more organized on what we're talking about. The three shorts that we're going to be talking about, and I don't know if we'll break them up in different segments or I'll just go through them all at once, but they are Punch Drunks, Violent is the word for Curly, and Men in Black. And then as well, you know what we'll do? We'll do a first segment with the ones that you need to see, and then we'll do a second segment with the honorable mentions, and then as always, we will end the show with some upcoming events. So we'll take our first break, a quick intro, but it's been a while, so I kind of want to just get the ball rolling. There's some great upcoming screenings that we'll talk about in the final segment. And of course, I was just told the other day that the Suspiria screening that we were talking about in the past has officially sold out. So you can't get tickets for that, which is a shame if you did not, because Jessica Harper, who stars in the film, is actually going to be coming to speak. So if you've gotten the tickets, that's fantastic. There's also a VHS swap or vinyl swap, all kinds of things. It's VHS, vinyl, and something else. April 21st in Philadelphia. I'll get you the further details on that in the final segment of the show. So we'll take our first break, and when we come back, we will get into the 3 essential Stooge shorts that you should see right here on Vintage Pop.
Show starts in 7 minutes.
So welcome back to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May. And the first part of our Stooges program that we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the 3 essential Stooge shorts that you should see. And as we talked about, they are Punch Drunks, Men in Black, and Violent is the word for Curly. And I'll get into different reasons. These, the way I pick them are not because of critics hold them significant. Some they do, but it's just what I think are the most culturally significant as far as a pop culture reference that might have come up in the past that you might relate to and that you may have seen in the past that relate to the Three Stooges. So the first thing I wanted to do was actually read a segment from the shorts book that I was talking about. Again, it's The Great Movie Shorts, Those Wonderful One- and Two-Reelers of the 30s and 40s by Leonard Maltin, forward by Pete Smith. So there are tons of different segments, in this book dealing with all kinds of different comedy actors and actresses that were involved in shorts, not just comedies, but also documentary travel logs that were done. Basically, these were shorts that were shown between features or before features. So when you went to a movie, you might not have seen the picture right away. You might have seen a Stooge short or an Abbott and Costello short or a Laurel and Hardy short, and which would be followed by the picture, or the feature film, I could say. And then after that, maybe during an intermission, you might see another one before another feature. So we'll get right into it. And I wanted to read you this segment on the Three Stooges, and here it is. In the sound era, no one topped the Three Stooges for longevity and productivity in the two-reeler field. From 1934 to 1958, they starred in 190 comedies for Columbia Pictures, and their shorts continue to be shown today on television stations around the world, capturing the fancy of a whole new generation of fans. This book actually been written in the 70s, so this was kind of like, if you're my age, I'm 26 going on 27. Most of our parents, if you're my age and you're a listener to this was right when they started to come on television for our parents. In any event, back to the book here. The Stooges' appeal then and now is basic. Their humor is built on slapstick and violence, two commodities of universal appeal, and a few comics could ever bring off this kind of low comedy as well as the Stooges. Mo Howard recently explained the formula for their two-reelers. When it came time to fashion a news story, they would think, where would we be most out of place? And on that premise, a comedy would be developed. The great part of this was that the Stooges seemed out of place anywhere, for their characterizations were from the very beginning never quite real. So the book goes on to talk about some more backstory about the Stooges and their time at Columbia Pictures. The shorts we'll be talking about have to do with Mo, Larry, and Curly. Perhaps in the future I'll do an episode where we talk about Shemp as well. Shemp, Curly, and Mo were all related. Larry was not. Larry, actually, as it always ties into the Philadelphia area, was born in Philadelphia, and you can actually eat at a restaurant where, in the building where he was born. It is actually a bar on South Street. It's called John's, and it actually says out front, John's, the birthplace of Larry Fine. And on the top of the building, there's actually a mural of Larry, and it's him with his violin. He was a violin player, and it's actually from the short that we'll be talking about in just a few minutes, Punch Drunks. So if you are local to the Philadelphia area, you can actually go check that out. So like, as I was saying, and as the book said, these shorts always would put them in situations that they were most out of place. Punch Drunks, Curly being a boxer, Men in Black, the boys, the Three Stooges being doctors, and violent is the word for Curly, where they actually pose as college professors. So the first one that we will talk about is Punch Drunks, and Punch Drunks, according to my notes and the book, came out on July 13th, 1934, directed by Lou Breslow. It was the second short released actually by the Stooges. And like all the shorts that we'll be talking about tonight, they were actually all starring Mo Howard, Larry Fine, and Curly, who his real name was actually Jerry Howard. The comedians released, as I said, 190 short films in the studio between 1934 and 1959. So this was in their first year, and the plot of it is basically Mo is a struggling boxing manager and is having lunch with several associates who are mad at him of the low payment and are threatening to quit on him when he notices a shy waiter, who's actually played by Curly, goes into a violent fit every time he hears the song Pop Goes the Weasel, which once he hears it, he knocks out the three associates that were with Mo. And so Mo actually also takes note of the guy who's playing the violin, who's Larry, who was known as a violin player in the past, and he sees that they could go into business with each other, becoming a team where Curly boxes, Mo's the manager, and Larry plays Pop Goes the Weasel on the violin, which makes Curly go nuts. He gets a boxing handle and becomes K.O. Stradivarius, and with Larry in tow playing Pop Goes the Weasel at every boxing match, Curly becomes the number one contender for the heavyweight championship. So this becomes kind of a gag throughout of the entire short, that every time that Larry plays Pop Goes the Weasel, Curly gets this super strength. One time a girl's car gets stuck in the mud and they start playing Pop Goes the Weasel and Curly picks up the entire car. Well, everything is going well, of course, but then he has to go against this guy, Killer Caduff, and only a few minutes into the first round, the violin breaks, so naturally Curly starts getting knocked around by the boxer, and that's where the entire comedy of the short unfolds, because Larry then has to find a radio that's playing the tune, and he runs back to the arena, and then it breaks the radio when Curly gets knocked into it, to the point where Larry finally goes back out on the street again to try and find another radio. And in fact, towards the end of the short, he manages to come across a politician's campaign truck blaring the tune from its speakers, and he race drives it into the arena, crashing through the sidewall, and knocks out Kilduff in a matter of seconds, winning the fight. And since the song's still playing, he knocks out Mo and Larry as well. So that's the first one. And I think the biggest thing, and the big connection of why I thought all these were significant, because there's a video game made for the NES and a couple other consoles. You can actually get it on the PlayStation, which is odd enough, but it's a Three Stooges video game, and some of the shorts that we will talk about tonight actually are portrayed in the game. So the second short that we'll be talking about tonight is called Men in Black, from the same year. It's actually the third short release. So these first two are the second and the third short that were released in succession. This one released on September 28th, 1934, directed by Raymond McCary. And have you ever heard Paging Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard? Well, this is the short where it came from. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. As I said, the release is actually the third short in 1934. Men in Black stars Mo, Larry, and Curly. As I said, that would be the trend for these shorts. So here's the basis for it. The trio play medical school graduates whose only credentials are that they had the highest temperatures in their class. They are hired as doctors at the Los Arms Hospital only because they have been in their senior class for too many years, and they are at the hospital and warned by their superintendent that they are not overly bright, but it is promised that their identities will be concealed as long as they promise to devote their lives to the glorious cause of duty and humanity, to which they say a million times over and over and over again throughout the sketch. Or short, I should say. The superintendent has told the Stooges to rush and answer the loudspeaker whenever their names are called. Then it consists of a series of skits in which the Stooges go from one patient to another, making mistakes, of course, all the way down from drinking a patient's medicine to sewing their tools inside a man on the operating table. And from this joke alone is where the whole joke of Paging Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard comes from. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. The first skit, they rush to answer the phone using a 3-person bike. When they arrive, they respond by calling all cars. The second loudspeaker orders them to various rooms to check on patients. The third, they report to the superintendent with their results. The fourth time, they answer riding a horse. And by the end of it, they run up to the loudspeaker and smash it into pieces. There's tons of funny stuff that happens in that short, but I definitely think that this, along with Punch Drunks, the second and the third, I should say, are definitely the ones that they started to get going as a comedy team. Now, you know, the Stooges, you may not know this, originally were vaudevillians, and they were an act ran by a guy named Ted Healy. So they were already used to working with one another, but on film, this would have been their third short, so you can definitely see them coming together. So for our last short, we will be fast forwarding on our essential shorts that you should see, and this is Violent is the Word for Curly. It was released in 1938, July 2nd, 1938. It's the 33rd short, so in 4 years, they made over 35 shorts at this time, and we come to the 38th short, directed by Charlie Chase. And the basis for this is administrators at Mildew College, which is an all-girls school, are begging their school's largest benefactor, Mrs. Catsby, to provide an athletic fund for the school. She does not approve of girls playing sports and informs the administrators that the money will be used for the salaries of 3 new professors, and they will be arriving that day. Meanwhile, you flash to the Stooges, who have just started a new job as service attendants at a gas station with a strong belief of super service, which you will see once you check out these shorts. When they get a customer, they are the 3 professors that turn out to be going to Mildew College, and they proceed to, wipe windshield wiper fluid all over their face and spray gas everywhere. And then eventually Curly accidentally puts gasoline in the radiator, and Mo checks it with a match, and the car explodes, and that prompts the Stooges to flee in a nearby ice cream truck that they had coincidentally thrown the German men's suitcases into, and Curly climbs in the back while Mo and Larry are in the front. Conveniently, they run out of gas right by Mildew College, and they are mistaken for the professors. to which they are forced to teach the students a lesson. And if you heard the song as we started the segment on the Essential Stooge Shorts, it's called Swingin' the Alphabet, which Mo is starting that rendition of the song, and eventually it turns into a jazzy off-time performance. Later on, the original professors eventually show up, blowing the Stooges' cover and vowing to return to their homes. When Mrs. Catesby angrily confronts the Stooges, they tell her that the college needs athletics, not foreign professors, and they offer to demonstrate, and the class follows. Meanwhile, the professors mix an explosive into a basketball, so while the Stooges perform football plays using the basketball, they force Mrs. Catesby to join in, and after being tackled, she agrees to provide an athletic fund if the boys would get the professors back. And it's just as they agree, Curly throws the basket, going over the fence, and the basketball explodes in front of the professors, who are blown back into the Stooges' clutches. The boys vow to clean them up and give them a little super service. So that would be the third Essential Stooge short that I think that you should see. Those shorts, again, are Punch Drunks, Men in Black, Violent is the word for Curly, and they are all readily available. You may be able to find them on YouTube, but the way that I have them is the Three Stooges collection, which I have purchased on VHS. There's actually many. I have about 13 volumes of them. Each tape has about 3 shorts on them, so I have 36 of the original 190 Stooges shorts. I'd love to have them all at one point, but getting those tapes are probably the best way of obtaining all the Stooges stuff. You can also probably get them on DVD, of course, and as well as digitally on Amazon, which I will try and find some links that you can check them out as well. We'll take our second break. When we come back, I don't think that these 3 shorts just will do it, so I have some honorable mentions: Dutiful But Dumb from 1941, Boobs and Arms from 1940, and Loco Boys Make Good from 1942. 2 shorts that are directed, the later 2 that are directed by Jules White, who worked with the Stooges quite a bit, and the first one we'll talk about directed by Del Lord. So we'll take a break. When we come back, I'll tell you about the honorable mention Stooge shorts that you should see right here on Vintage Pop.
Calling Dr. Howard. Dr. Fine. Dr. Howard. Calling Dr. Howard. Dr. Fine. Dr. Howard. Dr. Howard. Report to room 66. Dr. Fine. Room 72.
Welcome back to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May, and we are back with our second segment of Stooges, this being our honorable mention segment for Stooges. I may be calling these honorable mentions, but I think that these 3 Stooges shorts are as good as the first 3 that we talked about. These are Dutiful But Dumb, Boobs and Arms, and Loco Boys Makes Good. So we'll talk about the first one, Dutiful But Dumb, released March 21st, 1941, directed by Del Lord. And I was talking about it in the last segment, the Stooges video game, and actually in my notes right here, an adaptation of the Oyster Soup Battle, which I'll talk about in a bit, is featured in the Three Stooges video game, where players control Curly, who attempt to pick up and eat as many crackers from the oyster soup as possible before the oysters do. Oysters occasionally fire soup up at Curly. And so we'll talk about it. The Stooges are click, clack, and clock paparazzi-like photographers working for the Whack magazine. Their slogan is, "If it's a good picture, it's out of whack." And after failing in their attempts to get a photo of movie star Percival de Poyster and his new bride, their boss, Mr. Wilson, fires them. But Wilson changes his mind and instead sends the Stooges to Bulgaria, which is a parody of Bulgaria, obviously, for their next job, knowing full well that taking pictures in Bulgaria is against the law and is punishable by death. The inept trio arrive and inadvertently let another photographer who was to be shot escape, and the Stooges themselves try to escape but end up running into a Bulgarian prison. As the firing squad is setting up the Stooges' execution, Curly requests one last smoke, leading him to pull out a cigar the length of 2 hoagies, basically. This thing is huge. And after he finishes it, the firing squad open fire, but the trio run off with their heads inside their shirts, and it's actually a really funny clip. If you don't get to see this at all, you should look up that clip on YouTube. So further on, 3 Bulgarian officers watch a demonstration of their country's new ray gun, which can fire other guns remotely. When they hear of the Stooges' escape, they leave the officer's office, and the Stooges soon arrive in the office and discover the ray gun, which they think is a new camera. But when Moe and Larry pose in front of the gun, Curly manages to shoot their belts and hats off. So this eventually leads down the path where they get a hold of some of the officers' uniforms, and then they go into a cafe where this whole oyster soup battle takes place. The Stooges, now dressed in the Bulgarian officers' uniforms, end up in a local cafe in which Curly pits his wits against a strong drink and then a defiant oyster in his stew. This is actually the funniest part of the whole thing. So watching it alone is for the oyster battle, and that's why I looked it up once I first played the segment in the game. When the oyster works Curly's last nerve, he pulls out his gun and fires it into the soup. This gets attention of the guards, who promptly capture the Stooges and carry them off upside down on the bayonets of their guns, and that is how that one goes. The gag of oyster soup was later performed by Moe in 1948's Shivering Sherlocks, and Larry, who fights the lobster Gumbo in 1954's Income Tax Sappy. The gag also appears in the 1945 Abbott and Costello film Here Comes the Coeds. So that is Dutiful But Dumb. We'll now go to the 52nd short, or as I have it, the 52nd short. So we'll go 2 back. The first one we talked about was the 54th. This one, Boobs in Arms, the 52nd short, released December 27th, 1940, directed by Jules White. And the second of the 2 shorts that we have left, well, the first of the 2 shorts that we have left, 2 of these directed by Jules White. He directed many of the Stooges shorts, and in fact, as far as his filmography goes, they don't give me an exact number, and it's a lot to count, but 40% of his filmography is dedicated to the Three Stooges. So we will talk about these 2 films. The first one, like I said, Boobs in Arms. So the basis of it, the Stooges are street peddler greeting card salesmen who anger a man on the street after an accidental altercation. They are then approached by a woman with a request to help her make her man-hating husband jealous, and they find out quickly that it's the same men that faced before, and the Stooges defend themselves against the irate husband with their usual tricks by poking him in the eye, smacking him, and whatnot, and they run away from him and eventually end up in a recruitment office by mistake and end up joining the army. So no sooner are they acclimated with the new army surrounding when they meet the drill instructor, Sergeant Hugh Dare, the irate man on the street that they encountered before. So he desperately attempts to teach the Stooges the standard military drill from the Manual of Arms, and he threatens them during bayonet practice because he's driving them nuts, of course. And the Stooges are sent to the front line, where they decide to take a long nap, of course. And after learning that Sergeant Dare has been captured by the enemy, they are instructed to detonate a laughing gas shell, but of course they fire it on themselves, and they are laughing uncontrollably for most of the skit at this point. As they're laughing, they are captured and brought to enemy headquarters, where the sergeant is being detained. And the funniest parts of this happen at this point, since they are still laughing uncontrollably. They use violence in a wild flee for all fight against their captors, including an accidental sword thrust to the rear of the sergeant of the enemy, which they all start laughing during that. Eventually, the Stooges knock out everyone, including all of the enemy soldiers and Sergeant Dare, and after emerging victorious, several guns fire at them with the shells whizzing past, the Stooges always ducking and laughing or leaning back, giggling, each time missing another shell. But finally, the last shell passes between their legs and take them off into the clouds as they still laugh. So the funniest part about this whole short is probably once the laughing gas kicks in and they go to the enemy, because it's just nonstop. I guess this is supposed to be World War I from the way it looks, because World War II really was not taking place yet, and they look like they're going up against Germans, and it's quite funny because anytime they do something to the Germans, they just start laughing uncontrollably because of the laughing gas. This is probably the funniest one out of these honorable mentions that we'll talk about. It was filmed on August 15th through the 20th in 1940. The title is a parody of the 1939 MGM film Babes in Arms, based on the Lorenz Hart and Richard Rodgers musical. The working title was All This and Bullets Too. A parody in and of itself was in the title of the Warner Brothers film All This and Heaven Too. Just like the previous short that we talked about, some of these gags were reused by other comedy teams. Laurel and Hardy played the greeting card salesman who tried to make a married woman's husband jealous in the 1935 short The Fixer Uppers. And the closing gag of a person riding a bombshell through the air would be recreated by Slim Pickens in the 1964 film Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. So our final short was a short that I've actually seen recently, and it went right up to the top of my list just because I thought it was quite funny. It's called Loco Boy Makes Good. It is the 60th film short subject that was released by Columbia Pictures in 1942, and according to my book, it was released on January 8th, 1942, and as I said, it's the 60th short. Our second one, directed by Jules White. The basis for this: the Stooges get thrown out of a motel, literally thrown out. They actually are thrown and fly out on the street for being 8 months behind on rent. Desperate to pay their rent, the Stooges get some easy money by having Curly slip on a bar of soap in a hotel lobby so that they can sue the owner. He slips as planned, but the hotel turns out to be run by an old lady who is about to lose her lease to an evil landlord, so the trio then decide to help her fix up the place and start by beating up the landlord and stealing his watch. And obviously their usual antics are at full form as they renovate the place. The hotel's ready for their grand reopening eventually, though, and the boys put on a big show with famous critic Waldo Twitchell in attendance. Their corny act goes over poorly until Curly accidentally, and this is the funniest part of the whole short, puts on a magician's coat and becomes a sensation, and the place is a success. He throws mice all over the place, he pulls rabbits out, he squirts people in the face with flowers. It's very, very funny. But some facts about this: apparently the filming took place between July 29th to August 1st, 1941. However, it did not appear in theaters until January 1942, and this was the first Stooges short to be released after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Some controversy: in 1946, 4 years after the release, silent film star Harold Lloyd filed a $500,000 suit, which actually equates out to $7,488,798 today, against Columbia Pictures for violation of copyright. The court found the script for Lloyd's 1932 film Movie Crazy, which Clyde Bruckman had directed, virtually identical with the Bruckman script for Loco Boy Makes Good. Columbia lost the suit. Universal Pictures was later sued for similar violations in several Bruckman scripts, causing them several $1 million in damages. So that is crazy, but I will say this: these were very funny shorts, and definitely Boobs and Arms is probably the funniest of the three of these honorable mentions, but check out all three of them. If you can get your hands on this VHS set, they pop up all the time on eBay, so they're definitely quite cheap to obtain. You can also look on Amazon as well. There's probably some there. So we went through the essential Stooge shorts that you should see, as well as the honorable mentions, which are just as good, honestly. But definitely some 6 shorts that you can get rolling if you're not well informed about the Three Stooges, I guess, or never really had the chance to check them out. I would say that these are some gateway shorts, or some entry points for you into the Stooges 190 short subject library. There's also a few feature films as well. They're not as good, and I've never really seen any of them start to finish, but I do have most of the shorts that I got off of the internet at one point, but I mainly watched them through the VHS tape collection that I have accrued. So we'll take our final break, and as always, we'll talk about some upcoming events, as well as some things that you should check out right here on Vintage Pop.
Hi, I'm Barry Tompkins. As the second season picks up steam, Tim McCarver and I will be on hand to cover the bases and keep you posted on what's sure to be one of the most heated pennant scrambles ever. Can the division champions repeat their first season victories, or will this be the season of the underdog? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure: baseball fans are in for an unpredictable outcome. And we'll be here with updates, interviews, and in-depth analysis on Race for the Pennant, tomorrow on HBO.
Non-stop weekends begin in September on HBO.
Well, welcome back to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May. And great show today. A great comeback show. I guess it's not really a comeback. It's a return from a break, I guess. And I kind of felt bad about skipping a week, to be honest with you. I started a new class, which is kind of very programming intensive. I've been going back to school for a computer information systems degree. I already have my radio degree, but I'm going back for something a little more technical, and some of the courses are a little more difficult than others. So the first week was me just trying to get acclimated to the new coursework, and I was going to record last night, and it wound up getting a migraine and couldn't record last night. So I felt really, really bad about it, because I've kind of gotten into a pattern recording this show. And anytime I break the pattern, I kind of get upset about it, because you feel like once you break the routine, it's hard to get back into it. So I wanted to make sure that I got it out today, regardless of what happens, so that I can get a new episode out and we can get back into now next week the 8 weeks of the show of episodes that have been released. And I really cannot thank the support enough from friends, and just from looking at some of the numbers, some of the listeners that have been listening to the show. It can't all just be people I just know. So if I don't know you personally, thank you for listening to the show, as well as, please leave feedback. VintagePopcast@gmail.com, VintagePopcast@gmail.com, the Twitter page @VintagePop. Leave us a review on iTunes. There's just little ways that I can see that you are listening to the show. I only see download numbers. I don't know how many people are subscribed to the show, but I would assume some are, obviously, if the show's getting downloaded. So some future events, as I was saying, the Secret Cinema event that was supposed to take place on March 20th was canceled. There will be another one on April 20th. The subject is to be announced. I will post a link to their site, though, so once they do post some more information on it, you can check it out that way. The big thing on the schedule, April 13th, Suspiria 35mm print. It is sold out. Hopefully you got your tickets already, but if you didn't, maybe you can get one off of a friend or somebody that can't make it. It's 7 o'clock at the Lightbox Film Center in Philadelphia. Jessica Harper will be in attendance. I'm assuming doing a Q&A at the end of the show, so that should be really cool to check out. As well as, when I was looking at the venue that was holding that Secret Cinema event that got canceled, the Woodmere Art Museum, well, they have some more events. Last week they did Patterns, which is one of Rod Serling's early works on television from the 50s, which is definitely great. I did not feel well that day, so I didn't get a chance to make it out. But next week, April 10th, I believe it starts at 7:30 p.m., The Long Good Friday, starring Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. I'll post a trailer for that in the notes so you can check it out. All right, so there it is. It's written down for my notes, and it will be in the show notes so that you can check it out. You definitely need to see this trailer. It's one of the greatest British crime things I've ever seen. If you've seen movies like Snatch, or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, or Layer Cake, you can definitely see where a lot of this stuff came from. Some of these Jason Statham gangster movies. Bob Hoskins plays a really great role in that. You can check out the movie. It's actually free. It's a suggested donation of $5. So definitely check it out. It's at the Woodmere Art Museum, 9201 Germantown Avenue, Philadelphia. It's right outside of Manayunk. And I do believe that they actually have a parking lot, so you don't have to worry about street parking as well. So we talked about that. We talked about the Suspiria. There is, if you're a VHS collector, it doesn't matter if you are or not. VHS, DVD, vinyl, everything's going to be sold cheap. They're calling it the Retro Media Garage Sale. It's going to be April 21st from 5 to 8 p.m. at 327 South Street, and they're going to be screening the VHS classic Hard to Die at 8 o'clock. And I believe that's the South Street Cinema at 327 South Street in Philadelphia. And while you're there, why don't you get a drink at John's on South, the birthplace of Larry Fine, which is cool because it's got that mural, which is from Punch Drunks. Definitely worth checking out. And as I said, really glad that I've been able to do this. I'm glad to jump back in and to provide you with some new content. Looking ahead, I'd like to do a show on The Sting or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I'm reading a book right now called Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman, and he wrote the screenplay to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But both of the movies, The Sting and Butch Cassidy, are directed by George Roy Hill. George Roy Hill won an Oscar, actually beat out The Exorcist in 1973 for the Best Director Oscar. I would have liked to see William Friedkin win again, just because I don't think there's enough videos out there of him winning awards or just being generally recognized, and he's one of my favorite filmmakers. But in any event, since that, I wanted to see what it's all about. I have this thing on Laserdisc, but it's an early Laserdisc, which is called DiscoVision, and it doesn't really want to cooperate with my TV, so I'll either rent it off of Amazon or I'll buy the Blu-ray of Butch Cassidy and this thing. I'll probably get the Blu-rays of both. So look next week probably for The Sting and Butch Cassidy, both of which I guess I'll do in the same show. I know it's been leaning a lot towards film, but that's just kind of the trend that we've been going. Our friend of the show, Dan, he sent me another documentary about Grindhouse Cinemas. Maybe that could be a possible show, but probably we'll do The Sting and Butch Cassidy next time, just depending on whether or not I can get my hands on the discs, or really I can just rent them. So yeah, like I said, if you have any comments, concerns, recommendations, vintagepop@gmail.com. That's vintagepop@gmail.com. Our Twitter's @vintagepop. You can check us out again, Stitcher, Podbean. Leave us an iTunes review, please. It's very easy. Just go on iTunes, click whatever you think the show is. I don't care if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. Leave us a little rating, and if you got a chance to type a quick review, it really helps the show, because the more ratings and reviews that it gets, the more iTunes will put it into other people's recommendations so that they can check it out as well. And, you know, we can get some more people in, some more emails to continue the conversation on all things vintage. And we're building a really great thing here. 7 episodes in, we'll be going for 8 next time. And I'm really glad that all the listeners are here for it, and appreciate all the support. So I'm your host, Greg May, and this has been another edition of Vintage Pop, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great week.